My name is Emily Marshall. I'm 28 years old, and for most of my life, my family treated me like the shy one, the girl who should sit quietly and let others shine. What they never noticed was that while my sister, Rachel, chased attention, I quietly built a career in medical research. Years of work finally paid off when the Children's Cancer Foundation invited me to present at their $10 million charity gala. It was the first time my voice, my research, my dedication would stand in front of a room full of donors who could change lives. When I told my parents, their reaction wasn't pride, it was fear. "Emily, you'll embarrass yourself," my mother said, her tone carrying that cutting mix of condescension and false concern she perfected over the years. "Public speaking isn't your thing. Maybe Rachel should support you." My father, never one to contradict her, nodded in agreement. Rachel, glowing in the corner of the living room in one of her endless designer outfits, didn't argue. Of course she didn't. She loved being the star. She just tilted her head and gave me that infuriatingly sweet smile, the one she always wore when she knew the room was hers. I told them firmly, "This is my moment." My voice didn't waver, but the silence afterward was louder than any protest. They looked at me as though I had suggested something absurd, like a bird declaring it was ready to lecture at Harvard. Their eyes said everything. "Emily, you don't belong in the spotlight." But I refused to let them take this from me. For years, I had worked in labs until dawn, lived on stale coffee and grant deadlines, sacrificed birthdays, vacations, and any semblance of balance because I believed in what I was building. And now, after so long, I finally had an invitation to present that work before people who could turn research into reality. If I didn't claim this moment, who would? So I brushed off their doubts and locked myself away in my small apartment to rehearse. My living room became a stage, my couch an audience. I spoke until my throat was dry, rewriting, refining, stripping away jargon until my words carried weight, even without slides or charts. I practiced looking up, practiced pausing, practiced holding my ground the way I never had at family dinners. I imagined the faces of donors, skeptical at first, then leaning in when they heard not just data, but conviction. Every time I rehearsed, I could almost feel the children I'd met in sterile hospital wings standing behind me, silent but strong, reminding me that my work wasn't about me, it was about them. Still, beneath that determination simmered something darker, anger. Anger that I had to fight not only the complexity of cancer cells, but the disbelief of my own parents. Anger that Rachel, who lived for photo opportunities and applause, was being positioned to steal yet another piece of my life's work, simply because she was comfortable in the spotlight. Anger that my family couldn't see the difference between nerves and incompetence, between humility and weakness. It wasn't just about the gala. It was about every holiday where Rachel's successes were toasted, while my own were mentioned only in passing, if at all. Every time my parents excused her failures as ambition, but labeled my quiet persistence as timid. Every family gathering where I was the background character in my own story. And now, when I finally had a chance to stand on a stage of my own, they wanted to push me aside yet again. I refused. To anchor my resolve, I bought the gown. Emerald silk, fitted, but not ostentatious. The color chosen because it felt alive, confident, unshakable. It wasn't Rachel's style. She preferred glittering sequins or daring cuts meant to draw every eye in the room. My dress was different. It didn't scream. It spoke. I had saved for months to afford it, skipping dinners out, postponing repairs on my car, telling myself that one day the expense would be worth it. When I held the dress against my skin in the mirror, I didn't see the shy sister anymore. I saw a woman ready to claim her place. And yet, even as I zipped the garment bag and hung it carefully in my closet, I couldn't shake the echo of my mother's voice. "You'll embarrass yourself." The words burrowed deep, the way only a parent's words can. They lingered as I lay awake at night, staring at the ceiling, my pulse quickening with the fear of proving her right. What if I froze? What if the donors saw only a nervous girl, unworthy of their millions? What if, after all my work, I wasn't enough? The anger came back each time doubt whispered. Anger that my own family would plant those seeds, not strangers. Anger that instead of lifting me, they seemed determined to keep me small. That anger burned hotter than my fear, and it became fuel. So I kept practicing. I kept rewriting. I kept seeing myself not as the timid daughter or the overlooked sister, but as Dr. Emily Marshall, a woman whose words could open hearts and wallets, whose research could save lives. I told myself that no matter what my family believed, this night was mine. The gala wasn't about Rachel's charm or my parents' judgment. It was about the children waiting for hope, the doctors waiting for funding, and the woman who had fought too long to step aside now. It was mine, like the night itself. The evening began with whispers I tried to ignore, the kind that travel like smoke, thin, curling, impossible to grasp, but heavy with meaning. Rachel had posted on Instagram hours earlier, proud to support my shy sister at her gala debut. The caption sugary enough to drip from the screen. Alongside, it was a photo of her spinning in a ballroom mirror, the emerald silk of her gown fanning out around her like a declaration. My stomach twisted when I saw it. The dress, my dress. Not literally mine, but identical in cut, in color, in elegance. It was as if she had scored my mind, stolen the one thing I had claimed for myself, and paraded it as her own. I tried to convince myself it was a coincidence. Rachel had no shortage of gowns. She practically lived in them. But deep down I knew better. Rachel didn't believe in coincidence, only in strategy. If I wore emerald, then she would too, and the world would have to decide who wore it better. I hated that I knew the answer in my parents' eyes before the evening even began. When I arrived at the gala, the truth hit like a blow. Rachel was already there, not standing off to the side, not waiting quietly like support, but planted squarely in the center of a glittering circle. My parents flanked her like proud bodyguards, their faces lit with approval that had never once been turned toward me in quite the same way. Donors leaned in close, captivated by her laugh, her gestures, the way she held a champagne glass as if she were born to it. The chandelier above scattered light across her polished hair, catching the gleam of her jewelry, and for a moment, I wondered if anyone even noticed me slip into the room. Then she turned. "Oh, Emily," she said sweetly, eyes widening in mock delight. "We match. Isn't that cute?" Her voice carried just far enough for the circle around her to hear, their smiles polite, their chuckles soft, as if they were all in on the joke but me. I forced a smile that didn't reach my eyes. The humiliation was sharp, a cold blade pressing against my ribs. Matching gowns at an event like this weren't cute. They were a battle cry. It meant comparison was inevitable, that she had staged herself as my equal, or, worse, my replacement. And then the moment came that seared itself into my memory like fire. The chairwoman of the foundation, Margaret Hughes, a woman with eyes that missed nothing, stepped to the microphone. She scanned the room, her gaze slicing through the glitter and chatter until it landed on me. The tap of the microphone silenced the room. "Tonight," she announced, her voice steady, clear, leaving no room for interpretation, "we're honored to hear from Dr. Emily Marshall, alone." The word alone hung in the air, heavier than any applause could have been. The crowd shifted, a ripple of surprise coursing through them. Rachel froze, her painted smile cracking at the edges, her fingers tightening on the stem of her glass, until I thought it might shatter. For once, her confidence faltered. But the damage was already done. All eyes turned to me, not with admiration, not yet, but with curiosity, suspicion, expectation. They had seen Rachel holding court. They had read her post. And now, they were watching me, waiting to see if I was the real deal or the imposter in her shadow. The humiliation of realizing what my family had orchestrated burned in my chest. They hadn't come to support me. They had come to replace me. Rachel had dressed not in solidarity, but in sabotage, prepared to slip into the spotlight if I faltered, to bask in applause that was never hers to begin with. And my parents, oh, my parents, had nodded along, encouraging her, whispering reassurances that she, not I, was the rightful star. I felt the weight of their betrayal press down on me like stone. It wasn't enough for them to doubt me in private. They had brought their doubt into this ballroom, dressed it up in silk, and paraded it for the world to see. For a second, I wanted to run, to vanish into the crowd, to let them be right, to prove once and for all that I was the fragile, timid girl they believed I was. The urge was overwhelming, a tidal pull toward escape. My throat tightened, my palms dampened, and I imagined slipping away into the night, never stepping onto that stage, never facing the judgment of hundreds of eyes. But then, I remembered. I remembered the sterile hospital rooms, the smell of antiseptic, the beeping of machines keeping children alive as they fought battles their small bodies weren't built to endure. I remembered Ethan, 8 years old, his thin fingers clutching mine as he whispered, "Please make me better." I remembered the months of research, the fatal trials, the nights I cried alone in a lab before finding a glimmer of hope that might save lives. This gala wasn't about my parents' expectations or Rachel's vanity. It wasn't about gowns or Instagram posts or who could draw the larger crowd. It was about those children, about giving their voices a chance to echo in rooms like this one, rooms filled with people who had the means to turn possibility into reality. The pain didn't fade. It pressed harder, but it changed shape. It no longer screamed at me to run. It whispered, "Stand." So I stood there, my face burning, my chest tight, the emerald silk clinging to my body like armor. And I reminded myself why I was here. Not for them. Not for applause. Not even for redemption. For the children. Always for the children. I walked onto the stage, my heart hammering hard enough to shake the microphone stand. The podium lights were unforgiving, hot, white, and close, flattening the faces beyond them into a constellation of silhouettes and jewels. My first line came out thin, like a thread stretched between trembling fingers. I heard the tremor. So did they. It skated across the lacquered ballroom like a hairline crack. Then I looked up, really looked, and the glare separated into people. Front row, a father whose tuxedo sat strangely on his frame, as if he borrowed the confidence to wear it. Next to him, a mother with a program folded carefully in half, a pen clipped to the crease, her knuckles pale from gripping hope too tightly for too long. 3 rows back, an older woman with a pearl choker and the brittle dignity of someone who donates in memory, not in expectation. A few seats to the left, a teenage boy pretending to be absorbed in his phone while his eyes flicked up every other second, needing to hear what I might say about the disease that had stalked his little sister. They were not a crowd. They were reasons. My spine found itself. The second sentence landed steadier. The third had muscle. I let the pages on the podium become landmarks, not crutches, and spoke the way I do when no one is watching. How I speak to parents in narrow consultation rooms that smell faintly of bleach and coffee. How I speak to colleagues at 2 a.m. when the centrifuge hum is the only witness to the scale of our failure or the size of our hope. I want to begin with what we all already know, I said. Children should be planning birthdays, not treatment schedules. Parents should memorize favorite songs, not medication dosages. The ballroom quieted further, a depth-charge hush that made even the waiters, mid-step with trays of flutes, hover on the brink of stillness. So tonight, I'm not asking you to be impressed. I'm asking you to listen. I did not throw numbers at them like confetti. I set them down carefully, as if each figure were a candle in a dark room. I spoke about the nights spent calibrating assays until my eyes burned, about error bars that refused to shrink, about the first time a cell line responded in a way that didn't feel like a fluke. I described the work in images of human body could understand. A receptor that behaves like a locked door, a therapy that is not a battering ram but a key, an immune cell that needs a reminder of what the enemy looks like, a tumor microenvironment as hospitable to cancer as rich soil to a weed, and the quiet ways we were learning to salt that earth. I told them about Ethan, a small boy with a baseball cap too big for his head, the brim bending and unbending in his fingers like a nervous metronome. I told them how he whispered, "Please make me better," with the sober politeness of a child asking for water. I did not make him a miracle. I made him a child. I told them about the day his scans came back without the shadow that had haunted 2 summers, how he asked if he could go to the park, and if that meant he could also have pizza. Laughter cracked cautiously then, soft, grateful, terrified to be premature. I let it live for 2 beats, and then kept going. I spoke about failure, because hope that refuses to name failure is counterfeit. The trial we halted, because toxicity arrived hidden in good news. The hypothesis that looked perfect on paper and stubbornly wrong in the dish. The week when 3 families heard the worst sentence medicine knows how to deliver, and the way that grief reverberated down the hallway until even the vending machine sounded like it was sighing. We do not earn your trust by pretending we cannot be wrong, I said. We earn it by telling you exactly why we believe we're finally right. Across the ballroom, crystal sconces reflected my words into a galaxy of small, trembling lights. I watched faces open by degrees. The pearl choker donor's mouth softened. The teenage boy slid his phone into his jacket pocket, as if ashamed to have ever put it between himself and the world. My mother had stopped smiling. My father's posture lost its smug architecture. Rachel's expression, my mirror in emerald, flickered, then dimmed. That wasn't the victory. The victory was that none of it mattered anymore. I was speaking to the ones who had come to hear, not to judge. I brought them into the lab without drowning them in it. When we say biomarker, think of a lighthouse, I said. When we say targeted, picture a message written only a cancer cell can read and obey. I pulled a small, dog-eared note card from my pocket, the one I keep for parents who ask me how to explain the treatment to their kids. On it, a crooked drawing I had made years ago, a superhero cell with a cape, and a villain cell with tiny cartoon horns. The room laughed again, less carefully this time. A waiter blinked hard, surprised by his own grin. I watched hope travel, an actual migration, from row to row. It moved like warmth carried in cupped hands. It didn't ignore the ulcer of fear lodged under every ribcage there. It didn't pretend this was simple. It said, stay. It said, listen. It said, if you step forward, we will meet you at the edge with the work already underway. I let them see the people who build that work. I named the night shift technician who memorizes children's birthdays and tapes crayon drawings to the centrifuge. The research nurse who learns the choreography of a family's mourning so blood draws interrupt as little as possible. The biostatistician who jokes that he is fluent in both spreadsheets and superstition and who will not send an analysis until he's triple-checked it under 3 different lights. Hope is not an idea. It is a workforce, a discipline, a ledger of hours that no one applauds. I wanted them to applaud, not us, but the insistence of all that labor. Silence thickened, but it was the kind that leans in, intent, oxygen-rich. A fork tinged somewhere in the back. No one turned. Near the aisle, an elderly man removed his glasses and pressed the heel of his hand to the bridge of his nose, an old soldier's gesture for staving off emotion. I slowed. I let the air between sentences widen enough for breath to return to people who hadn't realized they were holding it. Then I told them the truth I had not planned to say. I used to think I was shy. I said, I think I was just careful. With my voice, with my heart, with your trust. Tonight, I'm not careful. I'm clear. We are closer than we have ever been, and the children are waiting. The room shifted again, something like a collective recentering. Even the chandeliers seemed to settle, as if the building itself had adjusted its weight to listen better. I remembered every time I had been dismissed as small, every time my words were graded by volume rather than value, and felt a new inheritance staking its claim in me. Steadiness. I wasn't louder. I was anchored. I ended the core of my remarks not with a flourish, but with a map. What the next 18 months look like if certain trials hit their endpoints. What contingencies are waiting if they don't. What data we will publish, and where. How we will report setbacks in plain language. How many children could be enrolled by quarter if the infrastructure expands as forecast. I did not ask them to believe in me. I asked them to believe in a plan whose bones they could see. By then, the quiet had changed from absence of sound to presence of attention. I could feel it resting on my shoulders, not as pressure, but as a shawl. Warm, heavy, chosen. For the first time in my life, the room saw me. Not Rachel, not the shy sister. Me. And more importantly than me, they saw the children behind me. Not as poster faces or statistics, but as neighbors whose futures might be recovered inch by inch. I let the final sentence stand without ornament. I stepped back from the microphone and placed my hands lightly on the edges of the podium, not to steady myself, but to honor it. The wooden rail I had gripped while learning how not to hide. The ballroom held still, poised on that thin, luminous wire between what has been and what could be. And in that held breath, hope did what it always does when it is real. It made room. When the final words left my lips, the silence that had wrapped around the ballroom stretched for a heartbeat longer, almost sacred in its stillness. Then the applause broke, an eruption that shook the crystal chandeliers and rolled through the room like a storm of affirmation. It wasn't polite clapping, the kind reserved for courtesy. It was thunder. Hands striking together with force, voices rising in cheers, chairs scraping as people surged to their feet in a standing ovation. The sound of hundreds of people choosing to stand for me. I gripped the edges of the podium, my pulse racing, not from fear anymore, but from the sheer weight of what was happening. In that thunder, I heard something I had been waiting to hear my entire life. Recognition. Not the conditional approval of my parents, not the hollow applause that followed Rachel's performances, but genuine, bone-deep acknowledgement. Donors surged forward almost immediately, not waiting for the program to resume. I watched as tuxedoed men and bejeweled women pressed past one another, not to greet Margaret or the board, but to reach me. Some clutched checkbooks, others simply extended hands with promises spilling from their lips. 500,000, Dr. Marshall, whatever you need. 1 million. Right now, in honor of my granddaughter. Our foundation will double our commitment. Each voice trembled with urgency, as though by giving, they were clinging to the same lifeline I had offered in words. I felt the heat of tears behind my eyes, not from exhaustion, but from the knowledge that the research, years of lonely, unseen labor, was no longer theoretical hope. Money meant trials. Trials meant children. Children meant futures. Futures meant life. Margaret Hughes stepped to my side, her presence steady as an oak tree. She clasped my hand, and without hesitation, lifted it toward the microphone. This, she declared, her voice resonant enough to still the chaos, is why we trust Dr. Marshall, not just for her brilliance, but for her heart. Her words did more than honor me. They consecrated the moment. I saw heads nodding, cameras flashing, and I felt the room absorb her statement as fact, not flattery. Behind the applause, a discordant note rang out. Rachel's laughter, brittle and too loud. She pushed her way toward me, clutching her champagne glass like a prop, her words floating above the roar. Oh, I helped coach her, you know. Emily's always been shy, but I told her, just pretend you're talking to me. She tossed her hair, flashing her practiced smile at the nearest photographer. But the lens didn't follow her. The lights didn't turn. Instead, a journalist in glasses pressed past her and shoved a recorder toward me. Dr. Marshall, what inspired you most in your research? Another photographer leaned in. One more shot, Emily, right this way. Rachel raised her voice, but it was swallowed by the tide of questions and flashes. Her face tightened, her practiced poise unraveling at the edges, as though the spotlight itself had grown hostile, refusing her entry. I answered the questions with honesty, not performance. I spoke of the children, of the long nights, of the sacrifices made not just by me, but by entire teams of researchers. And every answer seemed to anchor the donors further in their decision. I could see pens scratching across pledge cards, staff scurrying with clipboards, assistants darting between tables collecting commitments. Hope was no longer abstract, it was quantifiable, written in ink and numbers. Margaret, watchful and composed, placed herself subtly between me and Rachel when my sister tried again to step forward. Rachel's smile was fixed, but her eyes betrayed panic. She was no longer the darling of the room. She was a shadow clinging to the edges, desperate for scraps of attention that would not come. Then came the moment that carved itself into history. The foundation chair raised her hands for quiet, and with a voice sharp as a gavel, announced, "Tonight, thanks to Dr. Marshall's work and her extraordinary presentation, we have achieved a record-breaking $12.5 million in pledges." Gasps, cheers, and a swell of applause followed. I froze, the number rattling inside my chest like a bell. 12.5 million. My mind raced through the possibilities. Expanded trials, accelerated timelines, entire wings of hospitals supported. It was more than I had dared to imagine. Margaret turned to me, smiling with genuine warmth, and placed a bouquet of white lilies and roses into my arms. You, Dr. Marshall, are the driving force behind tonight's success. The cameras flashed so furiously, it felt like standing in lightning. I caught sight of my family then. Rachel's face fractured like porcelain under stress, the cracks running too deep to hide. My mother leaned toward her, whispering frantically, as if trying to script a way out of the humiliation. My father's jaw was clenched, his posture stiff with disbelief. For once, they were the ones cornered by judgment, not me. The irony struck me like a clean strike of glass. My entire life, they had feared I would embarrass them. Yet here they stood, embarrassed in front of the very crowd they had tried to impress, exposed by their own arrogance and miscalculation. I shifted the bouquet in my arms and lifted my chin. The applause wasn't just for my research, it was for my refusal to be erased. Every handshake, every flashbulb, every dollar pledged was a rebuke to the voices that had told me I wasn't enough. And for the first time, I stood in a room where I wasn't just seen, I was celebrated. For the first time, they were the ones embarrassed. That night, I didn't just prove myself to a room of strangers. I proved it to myself. The applause, the pledges, the weight of the bouquet in my arms, all of it mattered. Yes, but what mattered most was the quiet shift inside me. The moment I realized that my family's doubts had never been about my supposed weakness. They had been about their fear. Fear of what I might become if I stepped out from under their control. Fear of who I might be if I claimed my place in the world without their permission. I had carried their voices in my head for years, as constant as background static. You're too quiet. You'll embarrass yourself. Let Rachel handle it. Those words had wrapped themselves around my confidence like barbed wire, cutting into me every time I reached for more. But standing on that stage, feeling the room listen, truly listen, I understood that the barbs had always been theirs to wield, not mine to wear. When the gala ended, the aftermath told its own story. Rachel deleted her Instagram post before the night was over, erasing the evidence of her attempt to make my triumph her stage. For a woman who lived for curated images and carefully crafted captions, that deletion was louder than any confession. My parents didn't say a word as the car pulled away from the venue. No lectures, no dismissals, not even the usual sighs of disappointment. Silence pressed in, thick and uncharacteristic, because they finally had nothing to stand on. The world had seen me for who I was, and no amount of denial could bury it again. And me, I walked out of that ballroom with my head high, the bouquet cradled in my arms like a crown I had earned, not been gifted. The night air was sharp with autumn, the sky above heavy with stars, and for the first time in years I breathed without the tightness of doubt around my ribs. My heels clicked against the marble steps as though keeping time with my heartbeat. Every step away from that gala was a step away from their expectations, their limitations, their endless attempts to write my story for me. I thought back to all the times I had silenced myself, all the moments I had let Rachel's voice drown out my own. Birthday dinners where my achievements were brushed aside, holidays where my parents bragged about her latest successes, while mine were deemed too technical to interest anyone. I remembered the sting of their laughter when I hesitated, the weight of their pity when I faltered. All of it had been fuel, quietly burning, waiting for a night like this. And now that fire had broken through. not destructive, but illuminating. The greatest victory wasn't humiliating them. It wasn't proving them wrong in the eyes of donors or strangers. The greatest victory was realizing I no longer needed their validation. I had carried their approval like a finish line I could never reach. But the truth was simpler. Their approval had never been worth chasing. Justice that night didn't come as vengeance or spectacle. It didn't roar in anger or strike with cruelty. It came as clarity, a light that could no longer be dimmed. Sometimes justice doesn't roar, it shines. And that night, it shone through me, not as a spotlight I borrowed, but as a glow that came from within, impossible to extinguish. In the weeks that followed, I noticed this shift in myself. I stood straighter in meetings, spoke with more certainty, and no longer shrank when colleagues interrupted. My work didn't change, but my posture toward it did. I wasn't apologizing for my presence anymore. I was claiming it. And though my parents remained cool, though Rachel sulked in silence, their reactions no longer pierced me the way they once had. They were no longer the arbiters of my worth. The audience at the gala had seen me, yes, but more importantly, I had seen me. And that vision, the woman who walked on stage trembling and walked off steady, was enough to guide me forward. The bouquet wilted over the next few days, petals browning at the edges, fragrance fading, but I didn't throw it away immediately. I kept it on my desk until the last petal fell, not as a trophy, but as a reminder. Flowers fade, applause fades, but truth remains. The truth that I had spoken, the truth that had been heard, the truth that had finally silenced every voice, inside and out, that told me I wasn't enough. I am enough. I have always been enough. And from that night forward, I no longer lived waiting for anyone else to believe it. That was the triumph. That was the inspiration. And it was only the beginning.